Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 34. Stagetime, Part 1. Martin was quite good at ironing. He'd had to learn when he trained as a chef. With a coffee and a joint on the windowsill, he was ironing one of his thick beige linen shirts. Martin put his freshly ironed shirt on a hanger and quickly pressed out the worst of the creases in his trousers. He stuffed a towel into his matching safari hat to preserve its shape. The last 2 dates on the spring tour were to be recorded and filmed. Martin was excited. He wanted to look and sound his best. The freeloaders played 2 cracking shows. The audience didn't need any prompting from a warm-up guy. They knew it was special. With everyone playing a bit quieter, the sound on stage was excellent. The cameras were annoying, but the band was used to being filmed. There were long, gangly crane robot cameras that zoomed in like Doctor Who monsters. They skimmed dramatically over the audience's heads. The camera crew roamed the stage, wielding heavy shoulder units. Each had a grip kneeling close by, feeding them thick, snake-like cable. Martin tried hard not to think how important it was and how perfect it had to be. He did a bit more posing than usual. He drove home that night feeling he'd done a good job, but he was sad they wouldn't be getting any royalties on the live album and the DVD. The band had had to sign a waiver. They'd been forced to accept a straight fee with no share in the profits. Show business. The bus neared the Italian-Slovenian border early in the afternoon. Marcus collected the passports and the driver handed them over to the Italian border police. No one spoke much Italian and they didn't speak German or English. Everyone had to get out. The tour party stood next to the bus, feeling nervous. The customs officers entered the nightliner. They looked around the lounge. One of them opened the fridge. He took out a bottle of German beer. He held it up and smiled. Birra deliziosa! Marcus sussed what he was after. He gestured to say, "Help yourself." They took 3 or 4 beers each, and suddenly everything was all right. At the Slovenian checkpoint, 50 metres further on, they simply waved the bus through. The festival was set in a clearing in the forest. At one end, a gap in the trees led on to the riverbank. At the wooded end, there was a small guest house and restaurant, backstage for the day. There were a couple of rooms upstairs where they could get a shower and maybe take a nap. The shady stone-floored bar was a welcome retreat from the heat outside. A team of young Slovenian ladies tended to the band's wishes. There was coffee, cold drinks, and delicious homemade traditional Slovenian snacks. The girl behind the bar seemed to speak the best English. Martin thought she was certainly the prettiest. Her name was Emma. She had the cutest cheeks and the cheekiest smile. Martin sat near her at the bar. They got talking when she brought him a coffee. They seemed to click right away. He almost forgot why he was there. Martin joined the others in the backstage tent. Marcus was guarding a case of water and clutching a pile of clean white towels. They all stood in a circle and held hands. The pre-show shout ritual. The stage was completely open, with no roof. This denoted confidence in the weather. It was very hot and dry. Clouds of dust rose occasionally over the little arena. The crowd gave the freeloaders a warm Slovenian welcome. Martin was amazed by how they sang along to so many songs. Frankie's music was spreading. They jumped too. The dust flew up, almost blotting out the setting sun. The freeloaders could have stayed for a couple of encores, but all too soon their 90 minutes was up. Martin went back to the bar and settled onto a bar stool. He was keen to know what Emma thought. "So did you see any of the show?" "The last 3 songs. It was great." Emma drew him a glass of beer while he rolled a cigarette. He hoped she might have a bit of time for him after she finished work. He played it cool, not wanting to seem pushy. He stuck to his bar stool and bided his time. He was enjoying the draft Slovenian beer. He was also slowly getting slightly drunk. About 2 a.m, Emma finally said she was done for the night. She got herself a beer, came round to Martin's side of the bar and sat next to him. Martin rolled her a cigarette. Even though they hardly knew each other, he knew it just felt right. Martin had always been a hopeless romantic. Not that his romances were always hopeless. Emma was special. He'd never met a Slovenian girl before. She was different. Confident, self-assured, proud, intelligent, cultured. She was also funny, full of joy and kind. And my goodness, was she pretty. Martin sighed inwardly as she spoke. He suggested they go for a walk. There was still loads of time before the bus left. It was getting light. The woods were shrouded in mist from the river. Martin and Emma walked off the festival site and down a little lane. It led through dew-soaked fields. They came to a little village, old stone-built houses. Somewhere nearby, a cockerel crowed. They sat on a bench in the old village square and talked. Martin sensed Emma was tired too. Maybe they should go back. They stood up and retraced their steps. Martin took her gently by the hand and held it while they walked. It was wonderful to be with her, but terrible to have to leave. They got back to the bus. They stood near it, talking quietly. Everyone else was probably upstairs in their bunks, asleep. Martin scribbled his email on a beer mat Emma found in her bag. He kissed her gently on the lips. "Take care, Emma. I'm going to miss you." Emma blushed. "You take care too. It was so lovely to meet you." "You promise you'll write?" "I promise." She turned to go. Martin smiled as she waved. But he felt sick inside. The bus door hissed open and Martin went in. Andy was still awake. They sat in the lounge and had a last beer at sun-up. Martin couldn't stop thinking about Emma. Martin woke up feeling really rough that morning. He climbed gingerly out of his bunk and came down into the bus lounge. He was thirsty. Only beer in the fridge. He walked down the gangway to the front of the bus. He asked the lady driver if he could take a bottle of water from her fridge. She'd seen him coming. She grinned when she saw him coming in the mirror. "Doozy stars." She said he looked rough. Martin sat down next to her in the front passenger seat and gulped down the ice-cold water gratefully. They were approaching Stuttgart, the annual hip-hop festival. German hip-hop seemed to have annexed the reggae scene. The festival was always in some sterile concrete sports venue. He wasn't looking forward to it, being blasted with beats all day. He went back to sit down at one of the tables and rolled himself a cigarette. It must have been around mid-morning. The other freeloaders were all still fast asleep. Martin stared out of the window at the endless bland suburban houses. He was glad he didn't live there. Suddenly, Diana swore. What the fuck? There was a roadblock ahead. The local police were waving cars to the side. A police officer waved Diana over too. She swore in German. Verdammte Scheiße! Diana didn't often swear. The police hardly ever pulled over tour buses. Martin dashed upstairs and stuffed his weed under the mattress. He took all his documents, leaving nothing that would identify the bunk as his, just a couple of sweaty t-shirts. He shouted down the upstairs gangway. Polizei! Several heads popped out of the cubicles like chickens in a coop. Before pandemonium broke loose, he went downstairs again. He was met halfway by a uniformed police officer coming up. Warten Sie draußen! Martin did as he was told and waited with Diana and Marcus outside on the grass verge. The legality of the situation was questionable. 3 more police were assigned to enter and search the bus. The 2 outside dealt with the tour party individually. Everyone had left their smaller bags inside. These were simply emptied out onto the beds or onto the floor. If any weed popped out, they came down and asked whose bag it was. A couple of people fell for it. A few others, including Frankie, had very small amounts in their luggage. The police were disappointed. When they got to Martin, they found nothing incriminating. They would have found the weed under his mattress by now, though. What a waste. The festival itself was terrible, as Martin had anticipated. The police spent all day carting off harmless teenagers who'd been having a crafty spliff in the crowd. They'd been spotted with binoculars from the roof of a concrete building at the back of the arena. They also had a video camera set up for surveillance. The police were literally throwing their catch in the back of their VW bus and driving them away by the van load. Martin tried not to laugh as he walked past 2 plainclothes officers in sunglasses and American baseball jackets. They looked more like 70s porno directors than hip-hop fans. When it was their turn to play, the freeloaders faced a crowd of mostly disinterested hip-hoppers. Some of them seemed to think it was cool to throw plastic bottles. Martin was glad to get to the hotel that night. Pip still had a spliff's worth of weed the police hadn't found. The view from backstage that day was stunning. Far below him, Martin saw the huge long barges gliding slowly by down the River Rhine. They lay impossibly low in the water under their heavy loads. The river snaked through an enormous gorge between 2 steep cliff faces. He remembered coming back from Maryland's down the Moselle Valley, vineyard slopes and romantic cliff-top castles. There was a legend surrounding the cliffs Martin was standing on. It tells of a beautiful siren. She once lured sailors to their deaths on the rocks below. This was still known as a dangerous stretch of river. The venue itself was a stark, bare concrete construction seating around 10,000. This was a package of reggae artists featuring some famous names. Frankie had star billing, the last act of the evening. The amphitheatre looked better in the dark, with lots of coloured light from the stage. The band was tight, but Frankie was off form. Martin had hoped for something better. He'd seen so many amazing gigs there on TV. He was thrilled that a few friends had shown up. Martin walked out to the car park to meet them near where the bus was parked. They couldn't believe how tight the band was. It was a long way from that community centre gig with Abracadabra, where they'd first seen Martin play.